Thank you. So this is based on work done by myself and Dr. Wendy Nichols are informed by it. So if we weigh up the evidence as to why Santa might have got stuck in the chimney, we've got lots of research that suggests that we're more likely to gain weight during particular periods of the year. And the one in question at the moment is Christmas. And a systematic review showed that weight gains ranged from 0.4 of a kilogram to 0.9 of a kilogram across the festive period. And whilst this actually isn't a great amount of weight gain in itself, what we find is that this weight gain isn't typically lost in the months that follow Christmas. Again, not that significant, but if we add this cumulatively over the years, we then start to see the weight gain increase. And this could over 10 years be an increase of 5 to 10 kilograms of weight. And that could push somebody from a normal weight to an overweight to an obese category. So if we look at the reasons as to why we might gain weight over the festive period, if we can move on to the next slide, there are several factors for this. So why does Santa gain weight? Well, we know that Santa enjoys a more relaxed lifestyle over the festive period, all barring Christmas Eve, of course, where he's particularly busy, but even then he's partaking in some social eating. So at the moment, you'll be looking at the shelves in the shops and you'll be seeing a greater variety of foods, and those food types tend to be high in fats and high in sugars. They're the treat foods, the reward foods, so they're energy dense with a higher calorific value. Also, for some, there's an increased alcohol intake around the Christmas period as well, and alcohol can be quite calorific. We might have larger portion sizes than we might normally have. We have more relaxed eating with friends and family, and we sit around a table to eat, and we have foods in the middle. And what this does is it encourages grazing. So whereas we might normally finish a meal when we feel full, when we're sat socially and conversing, we pick of foods, and I'm sure if we think about it, we all might recognize that in ourselves. And then the other aspect is Christmas is a time where we're doing other things. So if we have a physical activity regime, that might drop off over the Christmas period. And we might get an increase in sedentary behaviour while we sit catching up with friends and family or watching those box sets that we got for Christmas. So the accumulation of it all is weight gain. On Christmas Day, people can consume 6,000 calories on Christmas Day when the recommended daily intake is 2,000 calories. And families report resisting overeating around family occasions and events as particularly challenging. So if we move on to the next slide, the question to ask Santa is why Santa eats. Dietary regimes, so nutritional only diets, tend to have limited success. We know that people who go on diets tend to regain the same amount of weight, or if not more, within 2 to 3 months of starting a diet. So they don't tend to have a great long-term success. And what this tells us is that we actually need to understand why people are eating in order to ensure we have longer term dietary success. So if we ask Santa why he eats, we know from research, and these are the two areas that we're going to focus on here, is that people will eat in response to emotions. And we've done a couple of systematic reviews, one with normal and overweight populations and one with obese populations. In the one with normal and overweight populations, we found that people consistently ate more in response to general pleasant effect than they did when compared to general unpleasant effect. And we tend to think of emotional eating as about being in response to unpleasant emotions such as stress or boredom. This is a time, if you watched the Grinch that was on TV last week, the Grinch emotionally eats in response to his loneliness, for example. So emotional eating is something that we all do to some extent. So Santa could be emotionally eating. He could be stressed about the pressures of Christmas and the challenge of delivering all those presents. But we can also eat when we are mindfully eating, we eat more. So when we're distracted, and we could be distracted by watching television, eating in front of the TV. A lot of us eat when we're working now, although that might not be quite so relevant over the festive period, or when we're playing a computer game, for example. These are all sources of distraction that can lead to us eating more calories. The next slide, please. So how do we help Santa? Well, there's two very common interventions that we use to try and help with restraint. And these are two that we've used fairly regularly. So one is a mood and food diary, and the second is mindful eating. If we move on to the next slide, and we start with the mood and food diary, research shows that if we maintain on a daily basis a mood diary, this reduces calorific intake to a greater extent than if we do it sporadically. So we do it every so often. And a simple diary can be really effective at helping to be better aware of what we're eating, when we're eating, and why we're eating. And all we need, as Santa has there, is just a plain pad of plain paper. And in the work that we've done around emotional eating, we've asked people to keep a record of an emotion that they recognize at the point when they have a food craving. So when they have a real strong craving to eat something, was there an emotion that they experienced or felt before that? So we do that. We ask them to record the emotion and the craving and how intense that craving was. Then we ask them what they wanted to eat. What kind of food type was it they wanted to eat? And we ask them to maintain that diary over a period of weeks. And what happens then is patterns start to emerge and people start to recognize their trigger emotions, because the trigger emotions are different for different people. One person's trigger could be stress. Some other people say they can't eat when they're stressed. So another person's trigger may be boredom, for example. So this mood food diary is about finding your emotional trigger. Because once we do that, we can look for alternative ways of managing emotions. If we move to the next slide, mindfulness, and there's Santa being mindful, has two focuses actually when it comes to emotional eating and eating behaviours. Firstly, it's about attending to the body's signals for hunger. We don't tend to eat intuitively anymore, and what we mean by that is we don't eat because we're responding to hunger cues. We tend to eat around, we're very habitual creatures as humans, so we tend to have a breakfast, a lunch, maybe a mid-morning snack, and an evening meal. So we eat around times of the day rather than in response to hunger. So by being more mindful of the body's signals and triggers for hunger, we can then start to eat in response to hunger rather than perhaps other triggers, which could be, for example, emotions. And then the second emphasis of mindful eating is actually during the act of eating itself. And we've learned a lot through COVID about the emotional experiences of eating. People who've had COVID and have lost the sense of taste, which is a common symptom, have described how they've lost the pleasure of eating. And actually and so they haven't eaten as much. And in order to try and retain some of the pleasures of eating, they've deliberately sought out foods that have textures that are crunchy, for example, because eating is an inherently emotional experience. It's a pleasant experience largely for us. So with mindful eating, what we do is we bring our full attention to the process of eating. We slow down the eating and we really take time to savor the food, savor the textures and the sensations that we have with that. And in order to do that, it's best to try and eat free from distractions. And a good example of that is if we go to the cinema and we buy popcorn. I'm a culprit of this myself. You buy the popcorn, you put it down, and you're picking away at the popcorn while you're watching the adverts. And then by the time the film started, it's gone, and you haven't even realized how quickly you've worked your way through it. That's mindless eating. We're not attending to the process of eating. We're not attending to the tastes and sensations. And we know that when we eat more mindfully, we tend to eat smaller portion sizes, and we also tend to eat healthier food choices. So these are two commonly used strategies that Santa could use to help manage his eating. If we move on to the next slide. So I've talked about COVID. We did a large international study that delivered a 7-day remote intervention. This came from anecdotes where people were saying, I've put on so much weight during COVID because I'm bored, and various emotions. So we thought, well, let's try and do something about it. So we did an online applied intervention, and it started by asking participants to identify an emotion that preceded a food craving. And what we found was, although pleasant emotions could precede a craving, it was more likely to be an unpleasant emotion. So you see there, anxious, angry, miserable, and tired and frustrated. If we move to the next slide. So what we did was we gave them, they went into one of two conditions. So in one group, they had just a food craving diary, a food mood diary, that's all they had. And we asked them to do just what I described, identify an emotion that they felt at the time of a food craving and just keep a record of that. It was as simple as that. and the food type that they wanted to eat. The second group had the food mood diary, plus they had a mindfulness intervention. So we asked them to eat mindfully and reminded them to eat mindfully on each day, and it was a 7-day intervention. What you see in these diagrams is almost immediately on taking part in the study, there was a reduction in unpleasant emotions. And there was little or no difference really between the two conditions. We had thought that the mood diary plus mindfulness would have a greater effect, but it didn't, because by making people aware of emotional eating, it seems that they were immediately looking for alternative ways to manage emotions other than food. But also that was being successful, because what we see here very clearly is that our participants were experiencing unpleasant emotions to a far lesser extent. So the intervention was helping them to downregulate or remove an unpleasant emotion, which is a great result. And if we look at the next slide, what we also found was that the number of food cravings decreased, probably because the unpleasant emotions had decreased as well. And again, you see a fairly rapid effect there on day 2 for the food craving diary. So it has fairly quick effects, and that's the beauty of this for Santa, is that this is something that he can do. It's very simple to do, it has very quick effects. So not only did food cravings reduce, but also acting on food cravings we found to reduce as well as a result of this study. So if we look at the next slide, we always ask people about their participatory experiences in our research. And what we had participants saying was that, you know, they had gained a bit of weight during lockdown, using terms such as "I'd let myself go," and that this was a kickstart. It was a prompt, it was a reminder, it was something to take part in that got them to think about what they were eating and why they were eating it. And it had an immediate effect for some of them. It'd be interesting to see how long this lasted for. That's something, you know, we're always interested in. But also saying that, you know, I will continue to practice mindful eating. So there were 2 intervention strategies that people not only found to be helpful, but they found to be user-friendly, and they had an intention to continue to use. So finally, on the last slide, to conclude, what we would say to Santa, stuck in the chimney, is don't beat yourself up. We all emotionally eat to some extent. It's no bad thing, unless we do it excessively or at the wrong time, such as when we need to squeeze down a chimney. But it's important for us to be able to recognise the difference between physiological hunger, that's that intuitive eating, and head hunger, which could be emotional eating. And if we are emotionally eating, and if we want to do something about that, we can keep a diary, and we can make sure that we're mindful and not mindless when we're eating. So Santa, Deborah and Martin, back over to you.
Thanks, Tracy. And I don't know about everybody else who's out there watching today and on our panel, but now I'm absolutely starving after eating all of that. So I think what Santa needs is a bit more time to lose a bit more weight, to get unstuck and get out of that chimney.
It sounds like he's never going to get out of it, does it?
Well, it's a good point, really. And but I think we should ask Heather Angel exactly what she thinks about that.
You mean Heather, who's one of our PhD students?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, that's exactly who I mean. She graduated from the University of Wolverhampton with in 2018 with a first class degree. No less. Actually, she's got an MSci in forensic science, and she's been continuing her educational journey by pursuing some doctoral research within the field of forensic taphonomy.
Heather is a fantastic science communicator, and she truly believes in the benefits of outreach and its ability to change people's perception of STEM and the negative stereotypes around who can engage in science, technology, engineering and maths.
So do you know what taphonomy means, Deb?
No, enlighten me.
Well, it's a branch of forensic sciences that deals with the process, I guess, of decomposition and I suppose eventual mummification. And if we left it even longer, I mean, I'm talking millions of years now, even fossilization, I suppose, perhaps.
So you mean that Santa can turn into a fossil?
Well, he's definitely an old fossil, and we know that already. But let us ask Heather's advice. Heather, over to you.
Thank you both. So hi everyone, I'm Heather and I'm going to be discussing with you what exactly is going to happen to poor old Santa if he can't get out of the chimney. Does anybody have any ideas given what we just spoke about? Next slide, please. I just want to do a little bit of a disclaimer before we begin, saying that this section of the Christmas lecture will have some sensitive or graphic images, really. Nothing too real graphic, but just something that some people may be uncomfortable about, and it talks about a bit of a sensitive topic. So if this is something that already sounds like it's not of interest to you, just maybe go away, make yourself a nice festive drink for about 5 minutes or so, and then pop back and see us. So did anybody have a good guess what we was talking about? So that's correct. So the first one is death. So death is exactly what's going to happen to poor old Santa Claus if he gets stuck up that chimney and we can't get him out. So decomposition is the process of changes that occur when death happens. And this isn't just to us humans or to Santa Claus, it happens just to every little thing that's here on Earth. So death and decomposition are all part of life and an important part of the life cycle processes. But that doesn't mean we want it to happen to poor old Santa just yet. Next slide, please. So the first thing we're going to talk about are post-mortem changes, and the post-mortem changes we're going to discuss first are those that happen in a short-term period, essentially. So the first one is Palamortis, and this normally happens pretty much instantly when death occurs, and this is visual changes to the skin. So the skin will become more pale in colour, maybe look a bit grey, maybe a little bit yellowish, and it's just simply because the heart has stopped beating, so it stops pumping the blood all around your body, and the blood is what gives your skin kind of the life and colour as we know today. So that's what the first thing that will happen to Santa if he gets stuck on that chimney and we can't get it out and he sadly dies. His skin will go more grey, more like his beard and his hair. Next slide, please. The second stage, which we would go to, is a stage called Rigor Mortis, and this is the cooling stage, and this is when heat is lost from the body through various aspects such as radiation, convection and evaporation. And this occurs because we're now dead, so unfortunately we can no longer control and regulate the temperatures that happen in our bodies. And the rate at which we lose heat depends on a whole variety of factors, which is a lot of influencing factors in death, have you know, and that is through the environment. So if it's really warm outside, the heat will lose less quickly. If it's cold, we'll lose heat more faster, sorry. And we also have things such as air movements and humidity, and whether us or Santa, I suppose, is wearing clothes. All these factors influence how quick the body will cool down after death. So hopefully the fire's not on underneath Santa, as that will maybe add a little bit of an effect to him later on, but we won't discuss that right now. We'll hopefully, fingers crossed, that the fire at the bottom of the chimney is all out. Next slide, please. The third stage, which will basically happen to Santa, is something called Rigor Mortis, and this is the stiffening stage of the body. So this is the kind of scene that you've probably all seen either TV shows and films before, and this is when a dead body goes quite stiff. And this is because all the muscles that are in the body, both voluntary and involuntary, become rigid, and these are due to biochemical changes. And this is a process that begins several hours after death and can last for several days. So this has kind of three stages, really. So your first is primary relaxation. This is when all the muscles in your body are still kind of floppy, just like I'm moving my arms now. That's what you could do to somebody, or Santa in this case. The second stage is when rigor mortis actually happens, and this is the stiffening of the muscles. So they become quite stiff and rigid, and you can't really move them without great difficulty. And then the final stage is secondary relaxation. And this would appear like your body's getting all floppy and you can move your arms again, but this isn't the case really. This is because your body is starting to break down all the cells and break down all the tissues in your body by enzymes and bacteria, and that's why it becomes more floppy and loosey again. But since we're talking about a little bit of science here, why don't we look at a bit more detail about exactly how that happens. So next slide, please. So hopefully you can see on the screen just a moment this little GIF just here, and this is kind of explaining to you how muscles work in the body and how this stiffening process exactly is going to happen. So as you're now dead, your body favours anaerobic processes, so those that don't use like oxygen over those which do use oxygen, so it's aerobic. So this means the glycogen levels, so like kind of the sugar levels in your body, start to fall and go below a level that's kind of important. And this causes the levels of ATP in your body to also fall between a critical level. And this is what needed to give your muscles energy, essentially, to do the process that you can kind of see on your screens right now, to be able to move your muscles to contract and decontract them. So as it falls below this critical level, it means that there's an irreversible linkage. So you can see these little blue heads here on your screen. They are called myosin, and these bind with the actin, it's the little green band just here, irreversibly. So they hold on together, and then because there's no energy to break them apart, they no longer break apart. And this is what causes your muscles, in a simple sense, to contract and stiffen. So the time that this occurs after death, as we said, can vary greatly, again, upon environmental factors. So it depends whether we're in a warmer climate, it'll happen at a slower pace, or whether we're in a colder climate, it'll happen more quickly. But usually this process begins about 3 to 6 hours after death, give or take, and it can last for about 12 to 48 hours after death. Next slide, please. And the final kind of short-term post-mortem change is something called Rigor Mortis. And this is simply the discoloration of your skin. And this, in a simple sense, is a kind of purple hue, which you can see on the pictures in front of you at the kind of the bottom of your body. And the bottom of your body doesn't mean your bum or Santa's bum or his back or his feet, just simply what area or side of your body is simply touching the ground once you die. What is the center of your pull of gravity almost. And this occurs because the oxygen can no longer circle around your body. So it kind of just pulls in one place and all gathers just there. And this is important in some cases because this can tell us whether someone has been moved after they have died. So in our case, we'll be able to see whether Santa stayed in his chimney when we were found, or whether he was maybe put there, perhaps, or whether someone managed to get him out the chimney and put him somewhere else for someone else to find. Our body will tell us this information. And this usually begins about 1 to 3 hours after death. However, this kind of process, as you can see here, becomes rigid and fixed in the body after 8 hours after death. So if we go on to the next slide now, you'll just be able to see all 4 processes that kind of the short-term changes which occur after you die. And we're going to move on in just a moment to look at some more processes that occur to your body, but they're more kind of long-term changes, as these are kind of what leads you to see the skeletons that you see today. So the upcoming slides, just a little bit of a warning, these ones are going to show some images of a deceased pig. However, I just want to say that the pig was not killed for the experiments that this was conducted on. This pig died of natural causes from a farm, so it was donated from a farm out of science. So next slide, please. So the first stage, which happens in the decomposition process, is the fresh stage. So this normally occurs as when the Pala and Ala and Rigor Mortis, all those stages we talked about previously happens. This is what essentially what happens to your body at this stage. You look relatively normal to anybody else. You may get some flies and some insects, and they might come and start landing on your body because they want to eat you as a food source. So they were exactly what happened to Santa too. So the insects were getting him for either the bottom of the chimney or the top of the chimney. They will find their way in definitely because it's a perfect food source just for them. The cells in your body begin to die now, and this is the start of the decomposition process. Next slide, please. So the next stage is the bloat stage, and this is when the body's microbes, so all these organisms that live inside your body that normally aid with like this digestion, so the nice bacteria that live inside your gut, these now start to break down your own body. And this process itself produces a lot of gases, such as methane and ammonia, and these simply build up and build up and build up in your body, and that's what creates this kind of bloated look. And this, at this stage, is when we'd start to definitely smell Santa if we hadn't seen him beforehand and we didn't know he was stuck up the chimney. At this stage in his decomposition process, the unfortunate owners of those houses in Dudley would definitely start to smell him. Next slide, please. The next stage after this is a stage called active decay, and this is when all the gases and the fluid that was built up in the body finally leave the body, because essentially, sounds a bit sad to say, but Santa will burst at some point. And this is when the insects and all the larvae love the body the most, and that's when they come and feed on the body and break down all the body's tissues. And they're a fantastic resource and a fantastic process in the decomposition process of breaking down all the body's tissues. Next slide, please. And the next stage is the advanced decay stage. So this is when the skin and all the cartilage and bones remain, and all the soft tissues are mostly gone now. And these are continuing to be broken down by beetles, and they're just literally munching on your skin and getting rid of all the nutrients and all nutrients which they like to feed on. However, this is when the environment around us, so the environment that's in the chimney, I suppose, in this sense, starts to love the decomposition process. So this is when any fungi or any growth on maybe the walls inside the chimney will start to flourish, as they're taking in all these nutrients that's being given out by the decomposing Santa. And finally, the final stage is the dry remains. And this is essentially where Santa now turns to pretty much a skeleton, unfortunately. So if he hadn't fell out the chimney by this point, he'd have definitely fallen out by now and be right at the bottom. So all that should remain of Santa, unfortunately, is just some skeleton and bones. But for the environment which Santa may be in, it'll be fantastic. You should have some beautiful flowers and some beautiful plants and some beautiful fungi growing all around us, because they're taking all the nutrients that's being provided by the body decomposing. Next slide, please. So this again is just a simple recap of how we go from the fresh stage, which is the thumb, then we've got the bloat, which is your forefinger, active decay, your middle finger, advanced decay, and then finally your dry remains, which is the skeleton. So next and final slide, please. And as you can see here, we concluded that what unfortunately happened to poor Santa Claus if he gets stuck in the chimney is that he's definitely going to die, and he's going to decompose and provide some smelly smells, and then unfortunately turn into a skeleton.
Thank you, Heather, for that. But I'm really scared now. If we don't get Santa out of the chimney, we're going to get arrested. We're going to be in big trouble.
I just don't. I don't think it'll come to that. You know, we've got a good team here. I reckon we'll be able to get Santa out of that chimney. I mean, imagine he's burning off all those mince pies while he's up there struggling away with his fat belly. You know, so hopefully he might lose some weight, but not through decomposition. I'd like to hope. You know, especially not with maggots munching on him, and he might just slide down the flue. You never know.
Well, I suppose he's not eating all of those mince pies that he normally eats, so that might be the case. But thinking about the legal side of things, what do you reckon about Santa? Could he get into trouble with the police for being stuck in somebody's chimney?
Well, he's an itinerant housebreaker. You know, I mean, let's think about it. So, but it's a really interesting question. Actually, I reckon, of course, you know, we need at times like this, we need a lawyer.
Well, I'm pretty sure that I saw Professor Peter Walton in our virtual backstage a few minutes ago.
That would be fantastic. Pete's excellent, and Peter is a barrister and professor of law at the University of Wolverhampton.
He's currently the director of the university's Law Research Centre and publishes widely. He also speaks at conferences all around the world. And did you know that he's also written a law textbook that is used by many law students around the country?
Oh, fantastic. I bet he enjoys the royalties off that one. And yes, his work has been quoted by the New Zealand Law Commission, cited by the New Zealand High Court, cited in arguments in the Privy Council, and it's been relied on by the UK Supreme Court, nevertheless.
Wow, that's fantastic. So, Peter, can you give us some advice? Is Santa going to end up in prison?
Well, thank you, Deborah and Martin. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, Martin, I've become independently wealthy on all the royalties from my textbook sales. So you join me here in a very monochrome Lincoln's Inn, and I'm very conscious of the fact that I've made no real effort to be that Christmassy. So let me just put on my Christmas hat, which has got some bells on it. And I was wondering if, rather than saying next slide, please, I can just sort of do that, but I don't think that's going to work. So when lawyers get asked to comment on legal issues, we normally don't have enough facts to really sort of sensibly comment on them. I'm going to take that off because we're relying upon media reports as to what's happened. And so what I'm going to talk about here is really based upon a media report. in the Daily Wolf Spade, and the headline here is "Millions of pounds of toys confiscated from sooty Laplander." And there's some bits and pieces in terms of the detail in the story. So reading through the story, I'll try and piece together some of the legal ramifications of Santa getting stuck in the chimney, and some of the things which appear to be occurring subsequent to that. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. It would appear from the report in the paper that the police were called, not surprisingly, I suppose, and trading standards were called out as well. And there's various other bits and pieces that have come out subsequently. And the issues that the article talks about in terms of the legal fallout are these things. So I'll whiz through these one at a time. So there's some talk about him trespassing on the residential land where he was caught in the chimney. And there's also a suggestion that he may be guilty of burglary. So we'll have a look at that in a moment. As the headline suggests, all the toys he had with him were seized, and so we'll look at the legal reasons behind that. All the elves he had with him have now been deported, so we'll also consider how that's happened. It transpires that Santa has been trading using a private limited company, which is incorporated in Finland, where he comes from. So he's also a sole shareholder and director in a company called Santa Claus Oy. I'm not sure how to pronounce that in Finnish. Apologies to any Finnish viewers. So the OY is the Finnish equivalent of LTD or limited that we have as a suffix at the end of any of our private limited companies. So it's the equivalent of that. So it's a Finnish company, but there are some issues around his activities with regard to that company. Not least the fact that he appears to have personally guaranteed the company's debts. And so the debts that the company seems unable to pay, Santa will have to pay himself. Due to some of his other bits and pieces that have been going on with him, there's also a concern that his actions as a director are being called into question. So we'll have a look through these one at a time. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. One of the sort of common misconceptions about the law is that trespass is a crime, whereas trespass isn't a crime normally. Trespass is merely a civil wrong, usually referred to as a tort by lawyers. And so the police being called for a trespass in itself probably isn't going to lead to a prosecution. But according to our newspaper report, the police were considering prosecuting Santa for squatting. And squatting is defined in section 144 of the Legal Aid Sentencing and Punishment of Offenders Act as a situation where Santa had to be trespassing in a residential building, which of course he was. He must know he is trespassing. Well, I don't think there's any really implied license that anybody's given to Santa for coming down the chimney, so I think he probably does know that he's trespassing. And this is where he probably gets off. He must continue or intend to continue to live on the premises for a period of time. And although he's been stuck in that chimney for a while, and we don't quite know how long he has been stuck there, I don't think there was any intention for him to continue in that chimney or an intention to continue to live on those premises for any period of time. So squatting doesn't appear to be a likely criminal offence for him, so he's probably going to get away with that. Next slide, please. Of more concern to him is that the police are looking at him for a possible claim of burglary. So he may be prosecuted for this, and burglary is defined under section 9 of the Theft Act, and he'll be guilty of burglary if he enters any building as a trespasser. I think we've agreed that that's what he has done, but here he's got to intend to commit one or more of the following offences. So did he trespass with the intent to steal anything in the building? Did he intend to inflict on any person grievous bodily harm? Or did he intend to do unlawful damage? Now, he's not going to steal anything because he's Santa. He's actually going to do the opposite of stealing. So he seems to be all right there. There's no suggestion that he's coming down the chimney to cause grievous bodily harm. So you'd think he'd be all right there. But has he sort of come down with the intention of doing any unlawful damage to the building? And although you might not think so, the police are considering that there's some criminal damage potential here, because there's some loose brickwork at the top of the chimney, which Santa's frame has dislodged, and therefore there is a suggestion that he might be done for burglary, because he's a trespasser with intent to commit unlawful damage to the building by knocking out some of the stones at the top, some of the brickwork at the top, so he can get his bulk down the chimney. The spectre of a potential burglary charge hangs over Santa at the moment. Next slide, please. Perhaps more serious for Santa is this allegation that he's infringed trademarks. So one of the things that we're very aware of is that throughout the year, Santa and his elves are busy making toys and various other bits and pieces to distribute to children around the world. And of course, what isn't always highlighted there is that some of these toys have got trademarks on, and Santa doesn't have the right to use those trademarks. And so those toys are in effect counterfeit toys. So just in terms of some very simple background about trademark law, if you register a trademark, you as the owner of that trademark have the right to prevent others using that trademark without your consent. And so a simple example of that would be if you've got a Lego model, people buy a Lego model because it's got Lego written on it, and they know it's not an imitation, it's a Lego model. And therefore there's a guarantee of its origin. Now, if Santa is making a load of toys and distributing those toys in breach of people's registered trademarks, well, he's going to be in a bit of trouble. And the newspaper report certainly suggests he's in a bit of trouble here. So he may well be hugely liable to the owners of those trademarks. And so there's various different trademark owners bringing civil litigation against Santa for breach of their registered trademark under Section 10 of the Trademark Act 1994. So that's a concern for him. More of a concern really for him is he's almost certainly breached Section 92 of the Trademark Act, which by using trademarks without authority. And that's a criminal offence. And he's also, it would appear, also going to be potentially criminally liable under the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008. So this is the provision whereby all of Santa's counterfeit toys were seized by trading standards. If he's found guilty of breaching the Trademark Act, Section 92, then he will be facing an unlimited fine and up to 10 years in prison. So he may regret a lifetime of making counterfeit toys. Next slide, please. Now, as the newspaper report says, these elves that came over with Santa have now been sort of seized by the police and the border agency and have been deported back to Finland. The real problem here is that did the elves have the right to work in the UK? And as we'll be aware, post-Brexit, Finnish elves as EU citizens no longer have freedom of movement or freedom to work in the UK. And so it would appear from our report that the elves did not have the right to be employed in the UK, contrary to our UK immigration rules. And so that's why they've been deported. Under sections 21 and 22 of the Immigration, Asylum and Nationality Act 2006, Santa and his company have committed an offence by employing them in the UK. And here, Santa could have another unlimited fine and another 2 years in chokey for his crimes. And so things aren't looking terribly good for him for bringing his elves with him. Next slide, please. In terms of his company, the Santa Claus Oy company, our Finnish private company, according to our report, various creditors are chasing Santa Claus Oy for various payments, not least the people whose trademarks have been breached. And you might think, well, it's a Finnish company, it's outside the grasp of the UK law, but you'd be wrong to think that. Under Part 5 of the Insolvency Act 1986, an overseas company may be wound up by the UK courts. And you might think, well, gosh, how on earth can the UK court claim jurisdiction to do so. And the answer to that is that although you've got to prove that the court should take jurisdiction to wind up an overseas company, as long as that company has some sufficient connection with the UK, then the court will go ahead and wind the company up. And it's usually sufficient for the court to be shown that the company has a place of business in the UK or some assets in the UK. And according to our report, because the sleigh and the reindeer were left on the roof when Santa came down the chimney, those assets remain in the UK, and those assets remaining in the UK is sufficient connection with the UK for our courts to claim jurisdiction to wind up the Finnish company. And so that's all going ahead in the High Court at the moment. Next slide, please. As I mentioned at the beginning, that the report does talk about the fact that Santa and Mrs. Claus personally guaranteed the company's debt. And that's not good news for Santa and Mrs. Claus, because it would appear that the debts can't all be paid, so the company has run up a huge amount of debts and liabilities. And because they're personally liable to pay off those debts, so it's not just the company that's liable, it's also Santa and his wife who are liable for those debts. He's going to have to pay. And the problem we have here is that the mortgagee, the person who's taken a mortgage over Santa's grotto, is taking steps to have Santa's grotto sold to pay off some of those company debts. So Santa and Mrs. Claus look like they're going to be homeless on top of all their other problems. Next slide, please. So in terms of Santa's directorship of his company, the company is being wound up by the UK courts. He's going to be personally liable for a lot of those debts. But in addition to that, under the UK Company Directors Disqualification Act 1986, it looks like he's about to be disqualified as a director as well. So under sections 6 and 8 of that act, despite him being a director of an overseas company, again, the UK courts may step forward and disqualify Santa from being a director of a company for up to 15 years. And the main ground for deciding to disqualify him will be that he's unfit to be involved in the management of a company. And the evidence that the Secretary of State is relying upon in bringing that action is really sort of twofold. The first thing is that there's unfit conduct, which includes him employing workers in breach of UK immigration rules, the elves that were deported. And secondly, using the company for a purpose of a deliberate breach of intellectual property law, our breach of the Trademark Act. And so because he seems to be using his company for these illegal purposes, this is just the sort of thing that a director doesn't get away with in the UK, and therefore the UK is going to disqualify him as a director. I'd be surprised if he's disqualified for anything less than 5 years for that. Next slide, please. So financially, Santa is in a bit of a hole here, and he might sort of want to run off to Finland as soon as he's sort of outside of our legal grasp and try and hide from his creditors. But as well as his company being subject to being wound up by the UK courts, Santa himself is also subject to the UK court's jurisdiction to make him bankrupt. And so because he's subject to that, he may well be made bankrupt. So the jurisdictional rule here is essentially that if at any time in the period of 3 years Santa has been ordinarily resident or had a place of residence in England and Wales, well, there's no sign of that, or has carried on business in England and Wales. And here, I think he's going to struggle a bit, because obviously he has been carrying on business, because he's been coming here once every year for at least the last 3 years to deliver presents when he's coming down people's chimneys. So I think the court would claim jurisdiction and would entertain a petition for his bankruptcy. And so as long as a creditor is owed at least £5,000, I think we might see that Santa is made bankrupt by the UK courts as well. Next and last slide, please. The other allegation that's hanging over Santa is that there's an allegation in the newspaper report that he was caught kissing Mummy. And so there's a suggestion that he's going to be part of the #MeToo issues that have swamped the media and the courts in recent years. Please press again. And there is a pending assault and battery case against Santa. So the police are taking this matter quite rightly very seriously. And so Santa is on top of all his other bits and pieces, looking at an assault and battery case, further criminal action against Santa. And so Merry Christmas, Santa.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for telling us about Santa's legal status.
You're very welcome.
Things are not looking very good for Santa, are they? You're muted, Martin.
Oh, well, it had to happen at some point, didn't it? So naughty, naughty Santa. He is, it's not definitely isn't looking good. But in our totally imaginary and fictional green room, I have been talking to Dr. Chelsea Slater.
You mean Dr. Chelsea Slater, who's a lecturer in forensic psychology?
That's absolutely the Chelsea that I mean, yes.
Did you know that she's the course director for the Masters in Forensic and Investigative Psychology, and also part of 2 research groups at the University of Wolverhampton, the Cyber Psychology Research Group, as well as the Social and Community Psychology Research Group?
Fantastic. Well, Chelsea thinks that Santa being stuck in that chimney is absolutely the least of our troubles. You want to hear her thoughts on who could be actually stuck in the chimney and what happens when Santa doesn't get stuck and is seen actually canoodling with a family member. We've already heard he's been kissing mother under the mistletoe.
Oh, no. So, Chelsea, can you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, thank you guys. So yeah, everybody's talking doom and gloom about Santa being up the chimney, but all we actually have is a pair of boots sticking out. So I think we need to look at some of the behaviors and determine who's up the chimney before we start panicking and start, you know, lobbying these accusations against Santa. So one of the things I wanted to introduce is a little bit about forensic psychology, because we kind of are a little bit misunderstood. So if we could click please forward. Excellent. So I thought I'd start off with what forensic psychology is, because most people usually only think of us as catching the bad guy. But realistically, forensic actually just means of, used in, or courts of law. So we've already heard from forensic science, and forensic psychology then is the psychological application of things used to investigate crimes in court systems. It's a little bit hard to define, and everybody has a slightly different approach to understanding forensic psychology. But basically, it's the psychological aspect of anything to do with crime or courts. So we look at everything from why certain people commit crimes, how they go about choosing who's the victim, consequences for victims, how the court system works, how police interact with the courts, stress for police, also rehabilitating offenders. How do we stop them from offending again? So we all look at all of this. Now, one of the areas we're going to look at tonight, and the area that I work in, is something called investigative psychology. So if we could click forward, please. So investigative psychology is actually a subdiscipline within forensic psychology. And it's a relatively newer area here, but we mostly focus on from the commission of the crime until the court case. And how do we go about investigating and improving the investigation and helping the police and figuring out what really happened. And this is what we're going to be applying today, is figuring out what really happened last night to end up with these boots sticking out of the chimney, who's actually up there, and what can we tell before we free whoever is up there, because clearly that's not somebody we want in our house. If we could click forward, please. Excellent. So one of the first things we actually should think about psychologically is, why was your home chosen? Now, if we think about just burglars in general, who it's very likely that might be who's up the chimney if it's not actually Santa, the highest predictor of you being broken into, your house being broken into, is if your house has already been broken into or your neighbors have been broken into. Offenders like to stick to similar areas. There's the advantage of knowing oftentimes that the layout's quite similar. They know similar security measures. They've done their research in that. Now, they might come after somebody that they've already broken into because windows will have to be replaced, locks will have to be replaced, but so will all the stuff inside. So they would know then that there's going to be a brand new TV, a brand new, you know, phones and things like that if they took them already. So there's an advantage for them to come back. So if you have been broken into, make sure you really ramp up your security then. If you could click again, please. One of the other things is trying to think a little bit like an offender. If you see a completely lit up neighborhood and stuff, you need to figure out which house of these would you select. So we've actually highlighted one here. So you see all these other houses have lights on. There's indication that somebody is up, there's somebody awake, somebody who could react to you breaking in. But that house that's dark, either they're out or they're asleep. That gives you time to break in and try to commit your crime, which is what an offender would try to do. So that is the house that they would choose. And if you could click one more time. And something really pertinent to this season is looking in the windows and seeing really good objects to grab. So seeing a tree with lots of presents under it, that is very, very tempting, because most people know that the things under the tree are going to be new things. They're usually expensive things. So if you see a tree with lots and lots of presents under it, yes, it looks really nice and it's great for Instagram and pictures, but we also know that that then is a target because there's all this stuff right there. If they just need to break in a window, grab a couple things and run. So do think about this when you're paying attention to your own house then. So if you could click forward again. So now we're going to start thinking about this whole problem of Santa being stuck up in the chimney. And what we're going to do is apply some offender profiling. Now there's a couple different things that fall under this category. So things like giving advice to officers on how to interview a suspect after you've caught them, understanding the offender's behaviors and future levels of threat. So this is really useful if there's an ongoing spree, or if you've caught them, they're in prison and you're about to release them back. We need to understand how likely are they to reoffend. The area that I actually work in is determining whether an offense is linked through analysis of crime scene behavior. So we're going to be applying a little of that, but the main thing that we're going to be focusing on, if you could click one more time, is deducing the characteristics of an unknown offender from crime scene behavior. And so this is what we're going to be focusing on today, is looking around the house to see what did this crime scene look like and what does that tell us about the offender. So if you could click forward, please. There's two things. I apologize. I think my slides have been adjusted coming into this. So, but there's two main terms that we're going to be talking about. The first one is modus operandi, or MO. And if you watch any sort of crime show, they'll be talking about the MO. And what they mean by this is it's a fancy Latin phrase for how do the offenders go about committing the crime? What is the pattern of behavior? How do they, break into your house and steal your things? Now, the thing that really can set offenders apart is their signature. And this was actually originally coined by John Douglas in the 1980s at the FBI. It's sometimes also referred to as a trademark, but this is basically a behavior that is unique to that offender. And it isn't needed to commit the crime, but it's something that rewards them either psychologically or emotionally. So it's something that they need to do to make the crime worthwhile for them, but isn't actually needed for the crime. Now, for us as investigators and detectives on this case, this is really helpful because it can help us start to narrow down who these offenders are and, link all of their crimes together then. So we're going to be talking about these two things as we move forward. So if you could move forward, please, to the next slide. So this then brings us to our problem. We've got a pair of boots sticking out of a chimney in our house. Now, first thought is it's going to be Santa, but are we jumping the gun here? We've predicted doom and gloom that he's going to, decompose in there, or he's going to go to prison for all of this. But realistically, is that actually Santa stuck up the chimney? So let's look at the crime scene then. So if you could click forward. Now, to make things a little bit easier for us, I've narrowed down the suspects that we think might be up the chimney. Now, there's obviously a lot more things or people out there that you could consider. The ones that didn't make the list include the Hogfather, Death dressed up as the Hogfather. If we were in a high rise, you might have to watch out for John McClane and terrorists going through. But today we're going to focus on these four individuals and understanding their patterns of behavior and how they interact with crime scenes. And then we'll go look at that crime scene to determine who from these four is actually in our chimney. So if we could click forward and meet our suspects. So of course, the first one, and the one that we all suspect is there, is Santa Claus. And so he's known by a wide variety of aliases we've talked about earlier in this lecture, but some famous ones are Father Christmas, Saint Nicholas, and Kris Kringle. Now, if we pay attention behavior-wise, we know he is mostly active around the 24th of December, although he can usually be seen throughout the month of December and some weird times throughout the year. Now, location, this is harder to pinpoint. He isn't really selective about this, but what we do know is he sticks to people who actually celebrate Christmas. He makes sure to respect that not everybody celebrates Christmas and has their own beliefs, and so he doesn't tend to hit those places, so they don't have to worry. So those of us that do celebrate Christmas, this is somebody we have to worry about. Now, his entry point, we talked about in the very, very first one, is usually a chimney. Now, he'll make do with whatever to visit everybody that believes in Christmas, but a chimney is his choice spot. Now, what is his modus operandi then? Is that he breaks into the house through the chimney, and he usually eats some food that has been left out for him. Now, this is going to vary depending on what country we're paying attention to. So in the UK, I hear it's sherry and mince pies. In my neck of the woods in the United States, it's going to be milk and cookies, and it'll be different in different countries, but we know that he's taking food from the house. Now, his signature, and this is the thing that stands out, is that he leaves presents or coal for people under the Christmas tree or in some random socks hanging up, usually things like stockings then. So this is quite unique behavior. It isn't necessary for him to commit this crime, but that is what fulfills him then. So if we could move forward to the next suspect then. So these are more likely to be suspects that I think might be there. And so these very famous ones are Harry and Marv. They're also known sometimes as the Wet Bandits. What's unique is they're not just specifically on the 24th of December, but throughout December. Now, their crimes tend to be located, depending on what movie you're paying attention to Chicago and New York. So outside of that, they don't tend to be as active. Now, their entry point is a bit different, and I haven't actually seen any of the cases where they've broken in through the chimney, but instead doors and windows or wherever the security of your house is weakest. Now, their MO is what's really interesting here. So we know that they actually scout out these houses ahead of time and use a scam. They use a ploy to get information. So they might dress as somebody as an authority figure, so dressing up like a police officer and asking about what your security measures are for Christmas. Well, if you were talking to a police officer who is checking to make sure that you're taking the proper measures, this is great. But if it's a criminal, you've now just told him what your security systems are and when you're going to be out of town. And that's the other part of their MO, is they only break into houses that are unoccupied or that they think are unoccupied. And then they begin to steal valuables. And that's really the main thing here, is that they're taking as much as they can. Now, their signature is actually really interesting. And throughout the year, I actually use them as my example of a signature that you can think of. So during the commission of their crimes, at the end of it, Marv will actually clog the sink, turn on the water, and this isn't needed for the crime to happen. It doesn't help cover up the crime afterwards. It's something that he does that makes him feel happy, and that has earned them the Wet Bandits title, and it also makes it really easy to see which houses they've actually hit then. So if we can move forward to the third suspect. Now, this is the Grinch. He doesn't have any other aliases that we know of, but he does have a known associate, Max the dog, and you can see him on the screen there as well. Now, he is active year-round, but he is very, very localized to Whoville, and that is the only place he seems to exist. Now, his entry point seems to follow Santa, and it tends to usually be a chimney, although throughout the year, it might actually be the door if you've invited him in. Now, his MO is a little bit more similar to those last two, the Wet Bandits. He breaks in, but he steals any sign of Christmas, not the valuables, but anything that can be associated with Christmas. And that includes raiding your fridge and taking the beast that you're going to serve for your food later that day. There will not be a scrap left when he is done. So his signature is just absolutely leaving the house bare and no sign of Christmas afterwards. So this will be quite easy to tell if he is our suspect then. And for the last one, can we move to the next slide? And our last suspect then is Jack Skellington. He's also known as the Pumpkin King. He tends to be active in October up until Halloween, and then also on the 24th, and seems to follow a similar pattern to Santa, where he only visits those who believe and celebrate Christmas, respecting different boundaries. His entry point is usually a chimney. Now, he doesn't tend to eat the food that's left out. It might disappear, though, might go into his bag, but he does break into these houses. And the big thing is he leaves dangerous and spooky presents. Now, these will be obvious to anybody. Not only are they often sentient and alive, they often are quite darkly colored and striped, and they do stand out quite a bit. Some of them do look dead or have been dead for quite some time. So this gives us our 4 suspects then. So if we can move forward, please. Now we'll keep their behaviors in our head as we start to pay attention to what our crime scene actually looks like. So imagine this is where you come down Christmas morning and this is vaguely what you see. And if you could click, please. And suddenly we see that there's some boots sticking out of the chimney. Well, we've jumped ahead, but we'll pause there and I'll keep going. So the first thing we can start to do is we can start to eliminate. We see that there's still a whole bunch of Christmas material left there. It doesn't look disturbed. So we also know that we're not 2-dimensional and we don't live in Whoville. So it's probably not the Grinch. So we know it's not him now. We look around and there's still quite a lot of valuables around. The sink isn't flooded in the kitchen, things aren't wet, and we've been home and we haven't talked with anybody who's pretending to be a police officer. So we're pretty sure, and we also aren't probably in Chicago or New York, so therefore we can eliminate the wet bandits. Now, we do see that there are some presents, some things in the stockings, so this would then lead us down to probably either Santa or Jack Skellington. And this is where we actually look at the presents and we can see some terrifying presents have been left. A severed head and a snake that is eating a Christmas tree. So this should hopefully give us an idea of who is actually up the tree. So if we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so we've got our suspects, and again, we can go through how we've eliminated them. So we weren't missing anything, or the house wasn't bare, valuables hadn't been stolen. So we can easily then eliminate the wet bandits and the Grinch. So click, please. And then we are left with Jack Skellington and Santa, because there's some presents have been left, and then obviously they've gotten stuck in the chimney on their way up. Now, the presents aren't terrifying, they're normal presents that we would have asked for. Plus, we're all forgetting Santa's magic. Is he actually going to get stuck in the chimney? I don't think so. So if you could click, please. We can eliminate Santa. He's not actually the one that's up in our chimney, which leaves us then with Jack Skellington. And those presents are a big dead giveaway. They really fit his pattern. That is something that fulfills him, is to have these creepy gifts. And therefore, we've all been assuming the wrong person. We've been jumping the gun. We don't have to worry about him decomposing up there because there isn't any organic matter. Maybe his suit, although it's probably synthetic material, so we don't have to worry about the decomposition. We can figure out how do we charge a skeleton with these crimes afterwards, but I can tell you it wasn't Santa then. So if you could click, please. And so we have solved this case. And if you click once more. So hopefully we've started to figure out a little bit of, in a quite fun way, about how offender profiling and behavioral analysis can be applied. Now, there was one more charge that was charged against Santa. And again, I'm going to say, from my understanding of Santa, it couldn't be him. So if you could click, please. And that is, of course, that Mommy was seen kissing Santa Claus. But we know that Santa Claus is married, and we know that, Daddy's still around. So who is actually kissing Mommy? And this is where we can go about and ask you guys to go think about this and solve the mystery on your own. So if you could click, please. So I want you guys to think of the behaviors that you're seeing, investigate the crime scene, and come to your own conclusions about who is actually kissing Santa Claus. So if you could click, please. So the first place you're going to want to start is investigating the crime scene. Now, for me, I would start by looking, are there any indications of a break-in? Are there windows that have been broken? Is there a door that's ajar? Is there soot in front of the fireplace that somebody has come through the chimney? Start to pay attention. There's also a clue if you don't find anything. This might mean that the person came from within the house itself. Click, please. Sorry, as my voice just breaks right there. The other thing you can start to look is there any accomplices around? Are, there reindeer on the roof? Is there a dog with a single antler attached to him? Are there some flying skeletons outside? This can help us narrow down again who might be kissing Mommy under the mistletoe. Click, please. Now, pay attention to what you saw. You can also look at, is this person wearing a disguise? Have they, in hiding as they come forward? So does the suit fit right? Is it hanging a little bit loose and the person inside is a lot skinnier than Santa? Are the bulges in the wrong spot and there might be a pillow stuffed up under the shirt? You might also pay attention to the beard, looking at the sideburns and stuff. Is it tied around the ears? Is this a real beard or not? And last click, please. And the last thing you're going to want to do while you're investigating who is actually kissing mommy under the mistletoe is do be aware that some crimes are committed by the people closest to you. We always like to think that crimes are committed by strangers, but you might want to look at the ones closest to you to narrow down that suspect list. And if you could click one last time to my final slide. So hopefully I have cleared up that Santa has had a lot of these awful things said about him, but he's going to be okay. He is magic. He is going to be visiting us all, or those of us that want him to, on the 24th into the 25th. It'll be fine. We'll have to figure out what to do with Jack Skellington and the chimney. You guys will be in charge of finding out who is kissing mommy. Maybe next year we can talk about the incident of Grandma and the reindeer outside, because again, I think Santa is being slandered. But until then, thank you all. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and happy sleuthing.
Well, Deb, do you know, I hadn't thought about any of that, do you know. It opens up a completely new can of worms right there.
I know, but I think that's something that is a conversation for next year's lecture.
Absolutely. Well, hang on. Something's just come through on my phone. It's actually from Santa. He sent us a picture. I've got a photo comes through on WhatsApp.
What is it?
Well, it's he sent us this thing, and it looks like Santa has managed to actually get out of the chimney after all.
Fabulous. So I'm so pleased he's managed to get out, but it seems he's too late for the lecture.
No, absolutely. Yeah, he's well too late tonight, but it's been absolutely fantastic.
So this has been an absolutely fantastic lecture, and well done everybody, but alas, I think it's time to go.
So I guess we should say goodbye to everyone, and first we'd like to thank our presenters.
So thank you to Dr. Jenny Gilbert and Elizabeth Thompson,
Professor Tracy Davenport,
to Heather Angel,
to Professor Peter Walton,
to Dr. Chelsea Slater,
and of course the person we mustn't forget, of course, is Santa. None of us want to be on his naughty list for this year.
And of course, thank you to our wonderful audience. It's been so lovely to see so many of you join us from all around the world, and we hope to see you again soon.